He cut her free from the tree. Then the Apache warrior said, "You're mine." The rope bit into her wrists so deep that blood had stopped flowing to her hands hours ago. Katie Morgan couldn't feel her fingers anymore, couldn't tell if the wetness running down her arms was sweat or blood. The cottonwood tree behind her had become her entire world since the raiders left her here to die in the desert sun. Her throat was so dry she couldn't even scream when she heard the footsteps approaching through the brush. The Apache warrior appeared without warning, his shadow falling across her like a blade. Katie's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched him study her with dark eyes that revealed nothing. He wore no war paint, carried only a knife and a rifle, and moved with the kind of silence that spoke of a lifetime learning to hunt. She tried to speak, to beg, but only a rasping sound came from her cracked lips. He stepped closer, and Katie closed her eyes, waiting for the blade. Instead, she felt the rope around her wrists go slack. The sudden rush of blood back into her hands made her gasp and almost fall forward. Strong hands caught her shoulders and steadied her. When she opened her eyes, the warrior was cutting the ropes around her ankles. She should run, she thought. She should thank him and run, but her legs wouldn't hold her weight. The warrior said something in his language, then switched to rough English. "You're mine now." Katie's stomach dropped. She'd heard stories about captives, about women taken by Apache raiders. Her mind raced through everything she'd been told, around campfires and in whispered conversations. None of it was good. She tried to pull away, but he caught her arm with an iron grip. "Water," he said, holding out a leather canteen. "Drink." She hesitated, but thirst won over fear. The water was warm and tasted like leather, but it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever experienced. She drank too fast and choked, water spilling down her chin. He pulled the canteen back, and she wanted to cry at its loss. "Slowly," he said, "or you die anyway." "Why?" Katie managed to croak out. "Why save me?" The warrior's expression didn't change. He studied her face with the same careful attention he might give to tracks in the dirt. "The men who left you here. They killed my brother 2 days ago, shot him in the back while he watered his horse." He paused, letting her drink again. "They took his body and put it on display in the town, like an animal." Katie felt ice spread through her chest despite the desert heat. She knew the men he meant. She'd been traveling with them, hired on as a cook for what she thought was a legitimate cattle drive. Then she'd learned what they really did, how they made their money raiding small Apache camps and collecting bounties on scalps and bodies. When she'd threatened to report them to the nearest fort, they'd tied her to this tree and left her. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know what they were doing until it was too late." The warrior stood and pulled her to her feet. Her legs shook but held. "You wear their dust, you ate their food, you took their money. I was trying to get away from them. That's why they left me here." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Maybe truth, maybe lie. Doesn't matter now. You're mine. You work for me until the debt is paid." "What debt?" "I didn't kill your brother. No. But those men still breathe while my brother feeds the earth. You will help me find them. You will help me make them pay. Then, if you live, you go free." Katie wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wouldn't help him kill anyone, even the men who'd left her to die. But when she opened her mouth, different words came out. "How many were there when they killed your brother?" 4 men. 1 stayed back with the horses. "There were 5 with me. Big man with a scar across his nose. He was the leader. Called himself Cole. The others were Danny, Frank, Pete, and a Mexican named Rivera." The warrior's eyes sharpened with interest. "You know them. I know their habits. Where they camp, how they think." Katie swallowed hard, knowing she was crossing a line she could never uncross. "I know Cole keeps a watch schedule that leaves the camp vulnerable every night between 2 and 3 in the morning." A ghost of something that might have been respect flickered across the warrior's face. "You learn fast." He handed her the canteen again. "Drink more. We walk soon." "Walk where?" "Away from here. Those men, they might come back. Check if you're dead yet." He glanced at the sun, calculating. "We have maybe 2 hours before they could return." "Need to be gone." Katie drank deeply this time, feeling strength slowly seeping back into her body. Her wrists were raw and bleeding, her dress was torn and filthy, and she was about to help an Apache warrior hunt down 5 armed men. 3 days ago, she'd been worried about whether she'd have enough money to make it to California. Now she was partnered with a man who'd just claimed ownership of her life. "What's your name?" she asked. He seemed surprised by the question. "You can call me Ben. The missionaries gave me that name when I was young. My real name you couldn't say with your tongue." "Ben," she repeated. It seemed absurdly normal. "I'm Katie." "I know. I heard them say it when they tied you up. They laughed about how you'd die slow." He picked up his rifle and slung it over his shoulder. "They were right about the slow part. Sun would have taken you by tomorrow morning. Maybe the coyotes would have come first." Katie shuddered. She'd heard the coyotes last night, circling in the darkness just beyond the reach of the moonlight. "For cutting me free." Ben looked at her with those unreadable dark eyes. "Don't thank me yet. Where we're going, you might wish you died on that tree. It would have been faster." He started walking, not checking to see if she followed. Katie stood for a moment, looking back at the cottonwood tree with its dangling ropes, then at the vast empty desert stretching in every direction. She could try to run, try to make it to the nearest settlement on her own. She'd probably die of thirst before she made it 5 miles. Or she could follow this warrior who'd claimed her as his property, help him track down killers, and hope she survived whatever came next. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Katie stumbled after Ben, her legs weak and her future uncertain. Behind them, the cottonwood tree stood silent witness to the end of one life and the beginning of something else entirely, something that smelled like smoke and tasted like revenge. Ben led her northwest, moving at a steady pace that Katie struggled to match. Her body was weak from dehydration and exposure, every step an effort. But she forced herself to keep moving, knowing that stopping meant dying. The desert stretched around them in shades of brown and gold, broken only by scattered sage and the occasional twisted tree. Heat rose in waves from the cracked earth, making the horizon shimmer like water. After an hour of walking, Ben finally stopped in the shade of a rock outcropping. Katie collapsed gratefully against the stone, feeling its residual coolness against her back. Ben handed her the canteen again, and she drank, more carefully this time. "Your feet," Ben said, pointing at her boots. "Show me." Katie unlaced her boots with trembling fingers and pulled them off. Her stockings were soaked with blood from where the leather had rubbed her raw. Ben examined her feet with a critical eye, then pulled a small pouch from his belt. He crushed some kind of leaves between his fingers and mixed them with water from the canteen, creating a paste that he spread across her wounds. It stung at first, then went blessedly numb. "Why are you doing this?" Katie asked. "If I'm just your prisoner, why bother keeping me alive?" Ben didn't look up from his work. "Dead woman can't track. Can't tell me where Cole likes to camp. Can't warn me if they set traps." He finished with her feet and sat back on his heels. "Also, I'm not them. I don't leave people to die slow in the sun. But you will kill them? Yes." There was no hesitation, no doubt in his voice. "They killed my brother. They took his body and displayed it like a trophy. In my tribe, this demands blood. Not just blood for blood, but blood for honor, for respect." He met her eyes. "You understand this?" Katie thought about her own family, dead now for 5 years in a fire that took their farm and everything she'd known. She thought about the rage she'd felt, the helpless fury at a world that could be so cruel and random. "Yes, I understand." "Good. Then we understand each other." Ben stood and offered her his hand. "We walk for 2 more hours, then we rest until dark. Can you do this?" Katie let him pull her to her feet. The paste on her wounds had helped, but she knew the next 2 hours would be agony. "I can do it." They walked. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Katie's dress clung to her with sweat. Ben moved ahead of her, sometimes disappearing entirely behind rocks or brush, then reappearing to make sure she was still following. He never went far, never let her out of his sight for long. Katie realized he was protecting her even while claiming ownership, and the contradiction made her head spin. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and red, Ben led her to a small canyon hidden between 2 ridges. A thin trickle of water ran along the bottom, barely more than dampness on the rocks, but it was water nonetheless. Ben showed her how to gather it in cupped hands, how to drink without disturbing the sediment at the bottom. "We stay here tonight," he said. "Build no fire, make no noise. Those men, they might be looking for us by now." "For me, you mean?" "They don't know about you." Ben smiled grimly. "They know someone cut you free. But wonder who. They'll come looking to finish what they started, maybe set another trap. Men like that, they don't like leaving loose ends." Katie settled against the canyon wall, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion. Her body ached everywhere, her wrists throbbed, and she knew tomorrow would be worse. But she was alive. That was something. "Tell me about your brother." Ben was quiet for so long that Katie thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and distant. "His name was John. Like me, the missionaries named him. They tried to make us white, make us forget our people. But John, he never forgot. He learned their language, learned to read their books, but his heart stayed Apache. He was teaching me the old ways, the things our grandfather knew before the soldiers came. I'm sorry, Katie said softly. Sorry doesn't bring him back. Sorry doesn't make the town take down his body and give him proper burial. Sorry is just a word white people say when they don't want to fix what they broke. Ben pulled dried meat from a pouch and handed her a piece. Eat. Tomorrow we start tracking for real. The meat was tough and salty, but Katie chewed it gratefully. As darkness fell over the canyon, she could hear coyotes calling in the distance, their voices rising and falling in an eerie chorus. She thought about the men who'd left her to die, about Cole's scarred face and cold eyes, about the casual way they'd discussed her death while tying the ropes. Ben, she said into the darkness, when we find them, what happens to me? That depends on you. You help me, you stay alive. You betray me, you die. Simple. And after? If we survive? Another long silence. Then you go where you want. I keep my word. Debt paid, you're free. Katie pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. She'd been free 3 days ago, or thought she was. Free to go to California, free to start a new life, free to leave the memories of fire and death behind. But freedom was just another word for being alone with nothing. At least now she had a purpose, even if that purpose was vengeance for a man she'd never met. Sleep came in fits and starts, broken by the sounds of the desert night and the ache in her body. When she finally fell into deeper sleep, she dreamed of ropes and fire, of her brother's face in the flames, of a scarred man laughing while the world burned. She woke before dawn to find Ben already awake, watching the canyon entrance with his rifle across his knees. The sight of him there, alert and ready, made her feel safer than she had in months. It was a strange feeling trusting a man who'd claimed her as property, but trust was built on actions, not words, and Ben's actions so far had kept her alive. As the first light touched the canyon walls, Ben stood and motioned for her to follow. Today we find their trail. Today we start the hunt. Katie rose on shaking legs and followed him out of the canyon. Behind them, the sun climbed higher, burning away the cool of night. Ahead of them lay a desert full of danger and death. And somewhere out there, 5 men who had no idea that the woman they'd left to die was coming back for them, with an Apache warrior at her side and rage in her heart. The tracking began at a dry riverbed 15 miles from where Ben had found Katie. She watched him work, moving slowly across the cracked earth, reading signs in the dust that she couldn't even see. A disturbed pebble here, a scrape mark there, the way the sand had been pushed aside by a boot heel 3 days ago. It seemed like magic until he started explaining what he was seeing. 4 horses, Ben said, crouching low, moving fast but not running, heading west toward the mountains. One horse is carrying more weight than the others. See how the print is deeper? He pointed to a track that looked identical to all the others to Katie's untrained eye. She knelt beside him, trying to see what he saw. How do you know it was them? This track. He indicated a distinctive mark in one of the hoofprints. Horse threw a shoe, damaged the hoof. Been walking on it wrong for a week at least. Same horse I saw when they brought my brother's body to town. His jaw tightened. I followed them that day, learned their patterns, lost them in the rocks near the border. But this horse, I'd know it anywhere. Katie studied the track, committing it to memory. Danny rode a horse that was limping. I remember Cole yelling at him about it, saying they needed to steal a fresh one before it went lame completely. Ben glanced at her with something like approval. You notice things? Good. You'll need that to stay alive. He stood and brushed the dust from his hands. They're heading to their camp. The one you told me about. There are 3 places they used regularly. One in the mountains, one near the river crossing, and one in the Badlands where the law won't go. Katie pointed west. If they're heading this direction, it's probably the mountain camp. There's a box canyon there, easy to defend, with water and grass for the horses. How far? 2 days hard ride. 4 days on foot, maybe 5. Katie hesitated. Ben, even if we get there, it's 5 against 2, and I don't have a weapon. Ben started walking, following the tracks. You have your brain. You know how they think. That's a weapon. He patted his rifle. This is just for when thinking doesn't work. They followed the trail through the morning, stopping only briefly for water and rest. Katie's feet screamed with every step despite the medicine Ben had applied, but she forced herself to keep pace. She'd been soft when she started this journey west, a city girl playing at frontier life. The desert was burning that softness away, leaving something harder behind. Around noon they found the remains of a camp. Ben examined it carefully, picking through cold ashes and discarded supplies. 2 nights old, he said. They stayed here after they left you. Felt safe enough to build a fire, cook food. 5 men, just like you said. Heidi looked around the campsite and felt her stomach turn. She recognized a tin cup she'd drunk from, a blanket she'd slept under. These were the same men, the same group. The reality of what she was doing hit her like a physical blow. She was hunting human beings, men she'd traveled with, eaten meals beside, listened to as they told stories around the fire. Evil men, yes, but still men. Having doubts? Ben asked, watching her face. No, Katie said, and was surprised to find it was true. I'm just remembering who they really are. What they really do. Tell me. Katie sat down on a rock and stared at the cold fire. They raid small Apache camps, the ones that can't fight back effectively. They take scalps and claim bounty money from towns that still pay for them. Sometimes they take women and children and sell them in Mexico. Cole bragged about it one night when he was drunk. Said he'd made enough money to retire, but he liked the work too much to stop. Ben's expression turned to stone. The camps. Did he say where? Near the border. Small family groups, mostly. He said the army didn't care because it kept the Indians scared and scattered. Katie met his eyes. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't help, but I am. Stop apologizing for them. You didn't do these things. Ben kicked dirt over the old fire pit, but you're helping me stop them from doing more. That counts for something. They left the campsite and continued following the trail. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills, then to steep rocky terrain that climbed toward distant mountains. Katie's legs burned with the effort of the climb, and her breath came in short gasps. Ben moved ahead of her like a mountain goat, barely seeming to notice the elevation change. Wait, Katie called, leaning against a boulder. I need a minute. Ben came back down to her, and for the first time she saw concern in his face. He put a hand on her forehead. You're burning up. The sun is too much. I'm fine, Katie protested, but even she could hear the weakness in her voice. You're not fine. We stop here until the heat passes. Ben guided her into the shade of an overhang and made her sit. He soaked a cloth in water and placed it on her forehead, then on the back of her neck. Drink, slowly. Katie drank and felt the world steady itself around her. I would be so happy. She'd been pushing too hard, trying to prove she could keep up, and her body was rebelling. How much farther to the mountain camp? 3 days, maybe less. But not if you die of heat stroke first. Ben sat beside her, his rifle across his knees. Rest now. We travel tonight when it's cooler. Won't we lose the trail in the dark? I know where they're going now. Don't need tracks to find them anymore. He glanced at her. You did good today. Kept pace, didn't complain. Your feet must be bleeding through those bandages. They were, but Katie wasn't about to admit it. I've had worse. Liar. But there was no judgment in his voice, almost a hint of amusement. When this is over, you should go somewhere cool. Montana, maybe. Mountains and snow. Forget about deserts. When this is over, I don't know where I'll go. Katie closed her eyes, letting the cool cloth work its magic. I was heading to California, but that seems like a different lifetime now, a different person. Desert changes people, takes away who you were, shows you who you could be. Ben was quiet for a moment. My grandfather used to say the desert is a teacher. Hard lessons, but true ones. Katie thought about that as she rested. She had learned more in the past 2 days than in months of travel before. She'd learned that she was stronger than she thought, that survival required letting go of who she'd been. She'd learned that vengeance wasn't just anger, it was a form of justice when the law failed. And she'd learned that the man she'd been terrified of when he'd first appeared was perhaps the only honest person she'd met in her entire journey west. As evening approached, the temperature began to drop. Ben checked her bandages and applied more of his medicine to her feet, then helped her put her boots back on. The pain was still there, but it had become familiar, just another part of the landscape of discomfort she was learning to navigate. They traveled through the twilight and into the night, Ben leading them by starlight and instinct. Katie followed, trusting him to know the way. The desert at night was a different world, cool and alive with sounds. Owls called from hidden perches, small animals rustled through the brush, and somewhere far off a mountain lion screamed like a woman in distress. Don't worry, Ben said when Katie jumped at the sound. Big cats don't want trouble with humans. Too many easier meals out here. What about other dangers? Snakes? Scorpions? Watch where you step. Don't put your hands anywhere you can't see. Beyond that, they'll leave you alone if you leave them alone. He paused. Men are different. Men you always have to worry about. They walked through the night, stopping only once to rest. When dawn broke, they were high in the foothills, with the mountains rising before them like a wall. Ben pointed to a gap between two peaks. Through there. The canyon is on the other side, maybe 6 hours away now. Katie looked at the gap and felt her heart rate increase. 6 hours from confronting 5 armed men. 6 hours from either justice or death. What's the plan when we get there? First, we scout. Learn their patterns, their guard rotations, where they sleep. Then we wait for the right moment. Ben glanced at her. You said the camp is vulnerable between 2 and 3 in the morning? Cole always took the last watch himself. Said he didn't trust anyone else to stay alert, but he'd fall asleep sometimes, especially if they'd been drinking. I saw it happen twice. Then we use that. We get close, wait until he's asleep, then we strike. Ben's voice was cold and certain. They won't know what hit them. And if they do know, if something goes wrong, then we fight, and we either win or we die. He looked at her seriously. You can still walk away, Katie. I can get you close to a settlement, give you enough supplies to make it. This isn't your fight. Katie thought about it. She could walk away, leave this all behind, go back to being the person she'd been before. But that person had been weak, had let bad men lead her into the desert, had nearly died tied to a tree. That person was gone, burned away by the sun and replaced by someone harder, someone who decided that some debts had to be paid in blood. It became my fight when they tied those ropes, Katie said. I'm seeing this through. Ben nodded, and something in his expression told her he'd expected this answer, maybe even hoped for it. They continued climbing toward the gap in the mountains, toward the box canyon and the men who waited there unknowing. Behind them, the sun rose over the desert, painting the world in gold and shadow. Ahead of them lay violence and reckoning. The box canyon was exactly where Katie remembered it. They reached the ridge overlooking it just as the sun hit its zenith, and Ben immediately pulled Katie down behind a screen of rocks. Below them, the canyon spread out like a natural fortress, its walls rising steep and smooth on 3 sides. At the narrow mouth, she could see horses grazing and the dark shapes of men moving around a campfire. Ben studied the layout with the intensity of a hawk watching prey. He counted the men, marked the positions of weapons and supplies, noted the placement of the horses. Katie watched him work, seeing the warrior beneath the missionary name, the hunter beneath the civilized veneer. 5 men, Ben confirmed. Same camp setup you described. Cole is the big one with the scar? Yes, by the fire. The others are Danny, Frank, Pete, and Rivera. Katie pointed to each man in turn. Danny is the youngest, barely 20. He's fast with a gun but stupid. Frank is the opposite, smart but slow. Pete is mean, likes to hurt things. Rivera is the most dangerous after Cole. He fought in the Mexican War, knows tactics. Which one held you down while they tied the ropes? Katie felt her throat tighten. Pete and Frank. Cole gave the orders. Danny and Rivera brought the ropes. Ben nodded slowly. All of them participated. All of them pay. He settled in to watch. We stay here until dark. Learn everything we can. Then tomorrow night, we end this. They spent the rest of the day observing the camp. Katie was amazed at Ben's patience, the way he could lie motionless for hours, watching and learning. She tried to imitate him, fighting the urge to shift position or stretch cramped muscles. By evening, she'd learned what he was seeing. Cole did take the last watch, and he did get drowsy around 3 in the morning. Danny and Frank bunked together near the horses. Pete slept closest to the fire. Rivera kept his rifle with him at all times, even when sleeping. As darkness fell, Ben finally moved, backing away from the ridge in a low crawl that Katie copied. When they were far enough away that sound wouldn't carry, he sat up and stretched. Rivera is the first target, he said. Take him out, quiet, the others will be easier. Pete second, before he can wake the others. Then Danny and Frank together, they share a blanket. Cole asked, make him watch his men die, then ask him about my brother before I finish him? That's not justice, Katie said quietly. That's torture. He tortured my brother, hung his body in the town square like a hunting trophy, made children throw rocks at it. Ben's voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands were clenched into fists. He gets to know fear before he dies. That's more mercy than he showed John. Katie knew she should argue, should say that they were better than the men below, but she wasn't sure that was true anymore. The desert had taught her that mercy was a luxury, that sometimes survival meant being willing to do terrible things. She thought about Pete holding her down, about Frank pulling the ropes tight around her wrists, about Cole's cold smile as he'd explained how she would die. "All right," she said. "What do you need me to do?" Ben looked at her with those dark eyes. "When the time comes, you stay hidden. If things go wrong, you run. Don't look back, don't try to help. Just run and keep running until you reach the nearest settlement." "I'm not running. We're in this together now." "Katie, no." She cut him off. "You claimed me, remember? Said I was yours until the debt was paid. Well, the debt isn't paid yet, so I'm staying." For a long moment, Ben just stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face. "You're either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both." Katie smiled back. "Probably both." They made camp in a small hollow far from the canyon. No fire, cold food, and water from Ben's dwindling supply. Katie's feet had stopped bleeding finally, though they still ached with every step. Her wrists were healing, leaving angry red marks that would probably scar. Battle wounds, she thought. Proof that she'd survived when she shouldn't have. "Tell me about your life before," Ben said suddenly. "Before the desert, before Cole and his men. Who were you?" Katie was surprised by the question. In the 2 days they'd traveled together, Ben had asked about tactics and terrain, but never about her personally. "I was nobody important. Grew up on a farm in Missouri. Learned to cook and clean and all the things girls are supposed to learn. Then my family died in a fire and I had nothing, so I came west looking for work, looking for a new start. And you found Cole. I found an advertisement for a cook on a cattle drive. Good pay. Travel to California. It seemed perfect." Katie laughed bitterly. "I was so naive. Believed everything they told me. Didn't question why they needed a cook when they barely had any cattle. Didn't wonder about the weapons, the night raids, the way they'd come back with blood on their clothes. When did you figure it out? 3rd week. We rode past an Apache camp that had been burned. Women and children dead, scalped. The men were laughing about it. Katie closed her eyes, remembering. I confronted Cole that night. Told him I wanted out, that I'd go to the nearest fort and report what I'd seen. He just smiled and said I wouldn't make it that far. Next morning they tied me to that tree." Ben was quiet for a while. Then he said, "My brother was killed at a camp like that. Small family group, just passing through. The raiders came at dawn. Killed the men first, then the women. Left the children alive so they'd spread fear." His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. "John was there by chance, had stopped to help them fix a wagon wheel. He tried to fight, but there were too many. They shot him in the back while he was running to save a child." "I'm sorry," Katie said again, knowing it wasn't enough. "Stop being sorry. Start being ready." Ben checked his rifle, counted his ammunition. "Tomorrow night, we make them pay for every life they took, every person they hurt. We become the thing they fear in the dark." Katie watched him work. This man who'd saved her life and claimed her as his own. This warrior with a missionary name who was teaching her that justice sometimes wore a violent face. She'd been raised to believe in law and order, in civilized solutions to problems. But out here in the desert, civilization was just a word. The real law was survival, and the only order was what you could enforce yourself. "Ben," she said, "after tomorrow, if we survive, what then? What do you do when the revenge is finished?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was softer than she'd heard it before. "I don't know. John was my last family. Without him, I have no one, no place. Maybe I go back to my people, try to live the old ways. Maybe I keep drifting, looking for more men like Cole to stop. Maybe I just disappear into the mountains and let the world forget I existed. Or maybe you find a new purpose, a new reason to keep going." Ben looked at her curiously. "You sound like you're planning to stick around." Katie surprised herself by smiling. "Maybe I am. I don't have anyone either, nowhere to go. California doesn't want me any more than Missouri did. But I'm good at surviving now. The desert taught me that. And I'm good at seeing things others miss." "You said so yourself. Partners, then? After this is done?" "Partners," Katie agreed. "If we live through tomorrow night." They settled in to rest, but Katie found sleep elusive. She kept seeing the camp below, the men moving around the fire, the violence that was coming. She'd never killed anyone before, never even seriously hurt anyone. Tomorrow night, that might change. Tomorrow night she might become something she'd never imagined being. But as she lay there in the darkness, listening to the desert sounds and Ben's steady breathing beside her, Katie realized she wasn't afraid of what she might become. She was afraid of failing, of letting Ben down, of dying before the debt was paid. The woman who'd been tied to the cottonwood tree would have been terrified of violence. The woman lying in the desert hollow was terrified of leaving a job unfinished. The desert had taught her well. Tomorrow would bring blood and fire and screaming. Tomorrow would bring an end to Cole and his men, or an end to her and Ben. Tomorrow would be a reckoning written in gunpowder and rage. But tonight, Katie allowed herself to rest, to gather her strength for what was coming. She closed her eyes and dreamed of fire again, but this time she wasn't running from it. This time she was walking straight into the flames, and they didn't burn her anymore, they just showed her the way forward. The day of waiting stretched like hot iron. Ben and Katie took turns watching the canyon, learning the rhythms of the camp below. Cole was predictable, his routines carved into habit by years of getting away with murder. The other men followed his patterns like sheep, never questioning, never thinking. It would be their downfall. As the sun began its descent, Ben started preparing. He checked his rifle again, loaded and unloaded it 3 times to ensure it wouldn't jam. He sharpened his knife on a stone until the blade could split a hair. Katie watched him work, seeing the transformation from man to weapon, the way focus narrowed his features and steadied his hands. "You ever killed a man?" Ben asked without looking up from his knife. "No. Might need to tonight. You ready for that?" Katie thought about it honestly. Was she ready to take a life? To look another human being in the eye and pull a trigger or thrust a blade? The old Katie would have said no, would have been horrified at the question. But the old Katie was dead, left tied to a cottonwood tree in the desert sun. "If it means surviving, yes," she said. "If it means stopping them from doing to others what they did to me and your brother, then yes. I'm ready." Ben finally looked at her, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. "You've changed. 2 days ago you could barely walk. Now you talk about killing like you've been doing it your whole life. 2 days ago I was dying. Now I have a reason to live. That changes a person." Katie met his gaze steadily. "You gave me that, whether you meant to or not. When you cut those ropes, you didn't just free me from the tree. You freed me from being a victim. Now I'm something else." "What are you now?" Katie smiled grimly. "Someone who finishes what she starts." As full darkness fell, they moved into position. Ben led Katie down from the ridge, approaching the canyon from an angle that kept them in shadow. The moon was a thin crescent, giving just enough light to see by, but not enough to betray their position. They moved slowly, stopping every few feet to listen, to check for signs they'd been noticed. The camp was quiet. Through the narrow gap in the rocks, Katie could see the fire burning low, see the dark shapes of sleeping men. Only one figure moved, pacing slowly around the perimeter. Cole, taking his watch, already looking drowsy. It was 2:30 in the morning. Another 30 minutes and he'd be fighting sleep. Another 30 after that and he'd lose the fight. Ben positioned Katie behind a boulder with a clear view of the camp. He handed her a small pistol, one he'd taken from his belt. "Last resort only," he whispered. If they get past me, you use this. Aim for the chest, squeeze, don't pull. Then you run and don't stop running." Katie took the pistol, feeling its weight in her hand. It was heavier than she'd expected, the metal cold against her palm. "Be careful." Careful is for people with something to lose. Ben checked the canyon entrance one more time. "I'm already dead inside. Have been since they hung my brother's body in the town square. Tonight I'm just making the outside match." Before Katie could respond, he was gone, sliding into the shadows like smoke. She watched him move, barely able to track him even though she knew where to look. He was part of the desert now, part of the night, a predator hunting prey that didn't know it was being hunted. 3 o'clock came. Katie saw Cole's head droop, saw him catch himself and shake it vigorously. He paced another circuit, stumbled slightly, caught himself on a rock. The fire was almost out, just glowing coals that gave more shadow than light. In the bedrolls, the other men slept soundly, confident in Cole's protection. Ben reached Rivera first. Katie saw movement, quick and economical, then Rivera's bedroll stopped moving entirely. Ben had his rifle, one down. He moved to Pete next, the man who'd held Katie down while they tied the ropes. This kill took longer, and Katie understood why. Ben was taking his time, making Pete wake up enough to understand what was happening before ending it, making him feel fear. Then everything went wrong. Danny, the young one, rolled over in his sleep and knocked against Frank. Frank woke with a start, saw Ben's silhouette against the dying fire, and shouted. The camp exploded into chaos. Cole jerked awake, reaching for his rifle. Frank scrambled for his gun. Danny, confused and panicked, fired blindly into the darkness. Ben moved like lightning. His rifle barked twice, and Frank went down, then Danny. But Cole had found his gun now, was bringing it up to aim. Ben dove behind a rock as Cole fired, the bullet sparking off stone inches from where Ben's head had been. Katie made her decision without thinking. She stood up from behind her boulder, aimed the pistol the way Ben had taught her, and fired. The recoil shocked her, sent her stumbling backward. Her shot went wild, hitting the canyon wall behind Cole, but it got his attention, made him spin toward her, gave Ben the opening he needed. Ben's rifle spoke once more, and Cole dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The canyon fell silent, except for the ringing in Katie's ears from the gunshots. Smoke drifted across the camp, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. 4 men lay dead. The 5th, Rivera, had died without ever waking. Katie stood frozen, the pistol still in her hand, staring at what they'd done. Ben walked through the camp, checking each body, making sure. When he reached Cole, he knelt beside him. The big man was still breathing, blood spreading across his shirt from the bullet in his chest. "You?" Cole gasped, recognizing Ben. "The Apache. Thought I'd killed all of you. You killed my brother. He was worth 10 of you." Ben's voice was ice. "Where's his body?" "What did you do with it after the town took it down?" Cole laughed, blood bubbling on his lips. "Dump outside town, or the dogs. That's all you people are good for. Dog food." Ben's knife flashed. It was quick, merciful even, despite everything. Cole's eyes went wide, then empty. Ben stood and walked back to Katie, wiping his blade clean on his pants. "It's done," he said quietly. Katie looked at the dead men, at the blood soaking into the sand, at the weapons scattered like toys. She'd helped kill 5 men tonight. She'd fired a gun at another human being. She'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And yet, looking at Ben's face, seeing the grief and rage finally easing, she couldn't regret it. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We find my brother's body. We bury him properly, give him the ceremonies our people deserve, then we ride to the nearest fort and tell them what happened here." Ben looked at the canyon, at the men who would never kill again, let them sort out the details. We did what needed doing. They gathered supplies from the camp, took the horses, found Cole's money stashed in saddlebags, more than Katie had ever seen, blood money from years of murder and bounty hunting. Ben wanted to leave it, but Katie convinced him they'd earned it, that the dead men had no use for it anymore.
As dawn broke over the canyon, they rode out, leading the extra horses.
Behind them, the camp lay silent, a testament to the desert's harsh justice. Katie rode beside Ben, her body aching, but her mind clear. She'd survived the cottonwood tree, survived the desert, survived the violence of the night. And now, she was riding toward something new, something uncertain, but something that felt more like freedom than anything she'd known before. Ben rode in silence, his brother's rifle across his saddle, his face set toward the rising sun. They had a body to find, a brother to bury, and after that, a future to figure out. Katie knew it wouldn't be easy. The desert never made anything easy. But easy wasn't what she needed anymore. She needed purpose, and she'd found it riding beside a warrior who'd claimed her as his own and taught her that sometimes the only way to be free was to fight for it. The horses moved steadily across the desert, carrying them away from death and toward whatever came next. Katie looked back once at the canyon, then turned her face forward and didn't look back again. The past was behind her, burned away by the sun and washed clean by blood. The future was ahead, uncertain but hers to shape. And beside her rode Ben, no longer just her captor or her savior, but her partner. Together they would find his brother, honor his memory, and then decide what came after. Maybe they'd keep riding, keep hunting men like Cole. Maybe they'd find a place to settle, to try building something instead of destroying. Maybe they'd just keep moving, 2 survivors in a desert that had tested them and found them strong enough to endure. The sun climbed higher, burning away the cool of night. Katie felt its heat on her face and didn't flinch. She'd learned to respect the desert's power, to work with it instead of against it. She'd learned that survival sometimes meant doing terrible things, that justice didn't always wear a gentle face, and that freedom was something you had to take for yourself, not wait for someone to give you. Ben glanced at her as they rode, and something passed between them without words. Understanding? Maybe. Respect, certainly. They'd been through fire together, had faced death, and dealt it out in return. That forged bonds stronger than steel, connections that went deeper than friendship or partnership or whatever words people used to describe what 2 people could become when they trusted each other with their lives. By midday, they'd put 20 miles between themselves and the canyon. They stopped to rest the horses and split some of the dried meat from the supplies. Katie's feet had stopped hurting, or maybe she just stopped noticing. Pain was relative now, something to be acknowledged and then ignored in favor of more important things. "The fort is 3 days' ride," Ben said, studying the horizon. "We could make it in 2 if we pushed hard. What about your brother? We'll find him first." "The fort can wait." Ben's jaw tightened. He deserves better than to be left in a dump. treated like refuse. They found John's body 2 days later, exactly where Cole had said it would be. The town had thrown him in a gully outside their limits, left him for scavengers. Ben didn't speak when he saw what remained. He just climbed down into the gully and gathered the bones with reverent hands, wrapping them carefully in a blanket from the supplies. Katie helped him dig the grave on a hillside overlooking the desert, a place where the sunrise would touch it first each morning. Ben sang as they worked, songs in his native language that Katie didn't understand but felt in her bones. Prayers for the dead, songs of mourning, calls to ancestors to welcome a warrior home. When the grave was filled and marked with stones, Ben stood silent for a long time. Katie waited beside him, giving him space for grief. Finally, he spoke. He wanted me to remember our ways, to not lose who we were just because the world was changing. I failed him while he lived. I won't fail him in death. You didn't fail him, Katie said softly. You avenged him. You made sure the men who killed him can never kill anyone else. Vengeance doesn't bring him back. No. But it stops the bleeding. It closes the wound so it can start to heal. Katie put a hand on his shoulder. And you gave him a proper burial. Honored him the way your people would. That matters. Ben nodded slowly. Maybe it does. He turned to her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his eyes were wet. Thank you for helping me. For not running when you could have. For being strong when I needed you to be. You cut me free from that tree, Katie said. Everything after that, I chose. I chose to help you. I chose to fight. I chose to be here now, and I'd choose it all again. They rode away from the grave as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. Tomorrow they'd reach the fort, would tell their story to men in uniforms who might or might not believe them. After that, the future was unwritten, a blank page waiting for them to fill it. But as Katie rode beside Ben through the twilight, she realized she wasn't afraid of that anymore. She'd been remade in the desert's crucible, had shed her old skin and grown anew, one tougher and more resilient than before. She'd learned that she was capable of things she'd never imagined, both terrible and wonderful. She'd learned that the line between victim and survivor was choice, that freedom was something you seized with both hands and refused to let go. Most importantly, she'd learned that she wasn't alone. Beside her rode a man who'd seen her at her weakest and hadn't turned away, who'd trusted her with his grief and his rage, who'd claimed her as his own and then shown her what that really meant. Not ownership, but partnership. Not captivity, but connection. The stars came out overhead, millions of them scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. Katie looked up at them and smiled. 2 weeks ago, she'd been tied to a tree waiting to die. Tonight, she was riding free under an endless sky with purpose in her heart and a partner at her side. The desert had broken her and remade her. It had taken everything she'd been and returned something stronger, something better. And as the horses carried them through the night toward whatever tomorrow held, Katie knew that she'd been changed forever. She'd been cut free from the tree, and in that moment, everything had shifted. Ben had said she was his, and maybe that was true. But it went both ways. He was hers too, bound by blood and battle and the quiet understanding that came from surviving impossible things together. They were partners now, equals forged in fire, and whatever came next, they'd face it together. The fort appeared on the horizon just after dawn on the third day. Ben and Katie approached slowly, hands visible, making no sudden moves. Soldiers met them at the gate, rifles ready, suspicious of the Indian man and the white woman riding together with a string of horses and bags full of money. Katie did the talking, telling their story simply and directly. The attack on the Apache camp, John's murder, her own near death, the tracking and the fight in the canyon. She expected disbelief, expected to be arrested or dismissed. Instead, the fort commander listened carefully, then sent men to verify her story. They returned 3 days later with confirmation. 5 bodies in a box canyon matched the description. Known outlaws wanted for raids and murder. The commander looked at Ben and Katie with something like respect. You did what the army couldn't, he said. Stopped a gang that's been terrorizing this territory for 2 years. There's reward money for most of them, if you want to claim it. Ben shook his head. We have enough. Give it to the families they hurt. The commander nodded. What will you do now? Ben looked at Katie. She looked back at him. In that moment, without words, they made their decision. We keep riding, Katie said. There are more men like Cole out there, more people who need help. We'll find them. Vigilantes, the commander said, but there was no judgment in his voice. Partners, Ben corrected. We take care of each other and we stop bad men from hurting good people. That's all. They left the fort the next morning with fresh supplies and directions to 3 other outlaw camps in the territory. As they rode away, Katie felt the weight of what they'd chosen settling over her shoulders. It was a heavy burden, this path of violence and justice, but it was one she'd chosen freely. "You sure about this?" Ben asked as they headed into the desert again. "I'm sure," Katie said. "You claimed me as yours when you cut me free from that tree, said I had a debt to pay. Well, the debt got bigger. Now I owe the desert for teaching me who I really am. I owe your brother for showing me what's worth fighting for. And I owe you for giving me a reason to keep going when I should have died. That's a lot of debt. Then I guess we better get to work paying it off." Katie smiled at him, fierce and bright. "Together." Ben smiled back, and they rode deeper into the desert, 2 survivors who'd found purpose in each other and in the harsh justice of the frontier. Behind them, the fort grew smaller. Ahead of them, the desert stretched endless and unforgiving, full of danger and opportunity in equal measure. Katie Morgan, who'd once been a city girl dreaming of California, was gone. In her place was something new, something forged in sun and blood and the unbreakable bond between 2 people who'd chosen each other when the world gave them every reason not to. She was a desert warrior now, partner to an Apache who'd lost everything and found something worth living for in the act of setting her free. The sun climbed higher and they rode on. There were bad men to find, people to help, wrongs to right. The desert would test them again and again, would try to break them like it broke everything. But they'd already been broken once, had already survived the worst the world could throw at them. Now they were something new, something the desert had made and couldn't unmake. They were free, bound only to each other and to the purpose they'd chosen. And as the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, Katie knew with absolute certainty that she'd finally found the thing she'd been searching for since the day she'd left Missouri. Not California gold or frontier freedom or a fresh start, but partnership, purpose, and the knowledge that she was strong enough to survive anything as long as she had someone riding beside her who understood what it meant to be cut free from the tree and claim your own destiny in the aftermath. Ben had said she was his, and she was. But he was hers too, and together they were something greater than either could be alone. They were survivors, warriors, partners. And the desert, harsh teacher that it was, had shown them exactly who they were meant to be.